All right, CJ. Did a couple hours of music. Beat the ennui out of myself. So a little jollier. A little bit more in the mood for conversation rather than lecturing. So, man, what do you want to talk about? What's on your mind?
Well, I was talking to some friends recently, and we came to this conclusion about art that maybe I hadn't really thought of before. But we were talking about modern art, and maybe if we can use an example like Marcel Duchamp's Ready-Mades, where he just has a toilet in an art gallery, and he just signs it, and that's the artwork. And we were talking about how the thought process behind that is this idea of framing, that you take something, anything in the world, and you put a frame around it, and that in doing so you create art. So then we got thinking that, oh, well, maybe in today's world artists make frames more than anything. Where maybe before it was more, we were more concerned about what was within the frames, whether it be the painting technique or whatever, all that stuff. But now, or music, since I guess this is a music and philosophy discussion.
It's whatever we want.
I know, but now that we're more concerned with framing of experiences of things, or making it more vague so then other people can fill in what's within the frames. And I'm thinking more so of music compositions where composers will only maybe give you 2 or 3 parameters and then expect you to make music out of those. Stuff like that. So I suppose I want to talk about this idea of framing and maybe what it implies for us as musicians, as artists, what it implies in regards to art in general. Maybe if it's a definition or a thing that can apply to art as we know it, or maybe all we have are just frames of reference, lenses, I guess, to look through things. I don't know. So with that vague topic, I would at least like to discuss.
All right. So I can sense the use of the word frame in at least 2 regards here. So you've got this idea of framing something, and then sort of that frame legitimates the object as a work of art.
Yes.
So, and that's what's his name? Duchamp? Is that
Marcel Duchamp. Yeah.
This is the guy who took the urinals and put them in a museum or whatever. So the idea of just ripping something out of the everyday world that we take for granted, and then putting it behind a velvet rope or in a frame or something like that, like automatically makes the thing art, which is really fascinating. And I don't recall the theory or any of that, but I feel like people like Heidegger would be appropriate to address this issue. I mean, maybe we'll do that one day. I think there's some essays on art.
Oh, he does have
that has something to do with this. But I'm not prepared to talk about that. But so that's one sense of framing.
Right.
And then the other sense of framing you mentioned is like sort of like in regards to music, and you've done this with me down in the basement, where you say, okay, because a lot of the music we make down in the basement is like working within limitations, and then you'll limit me within the limitations because it's just your clean guitar and my drums and nothing else really.
Right.
And then you'll be like, okay, you can only use you can only hit on the cymbal and the left tom, and that's how you have to make music. So you establish parameters. Now it would seem to me in framing in the first sense is a question more about how we make art, and if just selecting something out of the world and holding it up for everyone else to see legitimates the thing and turns it into an art object.
And let's make sure that we even put into that category painting things or any object. No, we're not saying just like, okay, here's a microphone we're going to just put a frame around that. But we could say, I'm going to paint this microphone. I'm going to take a picture of this microphone. I'm going to write about said microphone. I'm going to make a musical ode to said microphone. That too creates it. For me, I'm not talking about modern art, but all kinds of art, how we create frames around
the frame
everything.
The frame can take on many different ways.
Right.
And then the other type of frame is like creating art within parameters. So
if frame works for further, where you create the frame and then within that frame you create the piece.
Right. So I think I don't know. I think what sort of generated was the first option was a little bit more about when we frame ordinary or even extraordinary things. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a question kind of what are we doing, or is it legitimate, or
maybe what that means. I guess when we speak about the verb, I guess it's more so what does it mean for the noun. So we frame things. So what does that mean about art? Is art all just about maybe a matter of perception of seeing things? Because I sometimes look at modern art, as much as people are like, oh, modern art sucks, it's this, it's that. I almost look at it as a different way of or as a way to, it's almost pedagogical in the sense that it teaches you to see. It teaches you to see things in a different perspective, or to look at an object maybe with a different narrative sense, or maybe it more than a utility sense. So I guess that's more my question is, what does that mean if it is true that we do frame things, whether that be in the first perspective or the second perspective, then what does that mean for art in the sense of its definition or in the sense of its application as artists? Does that mean that, all I'm going to do is I'm not going to worry so much about writing full-fledged pieces of music like Bach and Beethoven and Mozart did in the past, but I'm just going to write little references or I'm going to keep using little frames, so that then people can create music. And then there's going to be tons of different variations on it, but there's never going to be one complete piece. I guess that's another thing too, with frames, because you can't really, with the second term, you can't really have symphonies or anything like that. It's more so just there's no true piece, I guess. I don't know.
Well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Do you find Duchamp's Urinal piece, do you find it provocative in any sense? And why do you find it provocative? What is it just a provocation, or does it inform us on any level?
I think to answer that, I have to use a joke about it.
Sure, go for it.
That I think it was this really good thought leader, if you want to call him thought leader, named Seth Godin, and he said, so the first person to put a urinal in an art gallery was Duchamp, right? He did that. So the second person to put a urinal in an art gallery was a plumber. And that's the distinction there, that he's an ordinary object, and he put a frame around that and said, this is art. So I think it's provocative in the sense, again, I guess going back to the idea that you see things in a different way, or that he had a different perception of a urinal that most, if not all of us have.
Do you think he perceived the urinal differently, or do you think he was really trying to make a point about things that are novel, and how the thing that is novel is going to be intimately tied up with the art object. Hence why when the second person puts a urinal into a museum, it's just a plain old urinal done by a plumber, whereas the first person who does it is some sort of remarkable artist. Or do you think he's trying to say that there is no such thing as art, that really art is just where you train a certain sort of attitudinal preference?
Maybe,
and really, really that you don't need a museum to experience art. You've got your stream of consciousness that goes about and sort of imposes a frame upon the world to begin with. You could take it a lot of different ways. I mean, You could say something to the effect of
that's
like,
almost like an aesthetic existentialism, where it's like there's no such thing as beauty. I mean, where it's like, I don't know, it's just like it's whatever you make it. That's what it almost sounds like. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and or does like by holding it up and putting it in a frame and or recording it off, does that allow for us to sort of appreciate the beauty of the thing that was there? You know, something we would have just not found beautiful at all. Something we literally, like, you know, deposit waste upon, right? Like, in a different context, we can actually see it being a beautiful thing.
I think that's where I find it provocative, at least in the sense that, again, it makes us see a thing that we take for granted differently, and which I think maybe just all art could be seen in that way if you kind of look at it as trying to create different lenses or frames, maybe like frames of glasses, as well as frames of paintings, but makes us see the world differently or see things in a different way. Like, I can think of, you know, great pieces of literature that make you, oh, like, I never really thought of the world in that way, because you look through the lens of that character or that author's ideas and attitudes, and you kind of say, oh, well, this normal thing that I take for granted, like walking the street every day, oh, when he writes about it, it's this really intense kind of scene, and I can't, you know, and it's amazing, and oh, well, maybe that's what it's like. So I think for me, again, it goes back to just seeing things differently, which I think is so cool and provocative to me, at least. And I think what makes something provocative.
Well, let's say by holding it up and putting it in the frame, putting it behind the velvet rope or whatever, we're training our attention in a different way. I know I'm stumbling into Heidegger territory, and I wish I could connect the dots here. But what I want to know is, like, we're experiencing the object in a totally profound and different way now. Mm-hmm. The question is, what is the object speaking to us? Right. So let's say, like, we are able to find the urinal intriguing, admirable in some sense, beautiful in some sense. I mean, I know there are a lot of people that listen to this, and they're just like, there is no way I could ever find something like a urinal to be anything close to beautiful. But do you what's the experience when you have your attention shifted to something so commonplace? Is it perplexing? Are you engaging with the object? Is it speaking to you in any way? And if it's speaking to you, what is it speaking? What language does it speak?
I remember, from what little Heidegger I know, I remember him saying that an object, or at least a work of art, creates space for aesthetic experience, which is kind of a fascinating way to look at it, that a piece of work actually, we don't impose our views on it, that it gives us the space to then go into its world and see things. And I kind of look at it in that way, where maybe Duchamp is just giving the urinal maybe more space for us to perceive it aesthetically, where maybe it was limited to before because all we saw it was for the utility purposes of, okay, the urinal, you're just supposed to defecate in it, right? And you're just supposed to flush it, and that's it. And you only really care about its looks, because if it's too small and you try to put your ass down, it's not going to work. And if it's too large, you're going to fall in it. So maybe it's more utility purposes, but maybe this goes to the nature of artists, or maybe like making work that they're trying to extend the object's, I guess, space. I guess the space that the object presents itself to us, so then that we can think about it in a different way and maybe have a quote-unquote aesthetic experience, whatever the hell that means. But
I'm gonna have to go and look this up, or I'll have to consult a few. I have a few friends who do a lot with Heidegger, but I think
it was one of his essays on art, or the nature of art.
Yeah, I think it has something to do. I think it has something with it with the object finally freed from its utility, I think it's demonstrating its being.
Okay.
Whatever. Now, what being is, I don't know, but it's kind of it's freed from the sort of perceptions of man. I think Heidegger's done stuff with on this other commonplace objects like hammers and like moldy shoes and things like that. Mm-hmm. But so the more interesting question is, okay, if you can experience the being of the mundane object, like what are you experiencing? Are you getting in? I think the question would be is like, does the whole world then does it remind you that the whole world is sort of alive with being if you kind of free it from the sort of utilitarian impositions that we put on it, regardless if they be chairs or urinals or whatever else? Or and what does it mean for something to be alive with being?
Maybe it's more so alive in the sense that it reminds us of certain things. Or I can almost think of like Marcel Proust, how he saw his whole childhood in a Madeline or in a little cookie, where it's just like maybe like maybe being means memory, or it means what it means to be alive, or like humanity, or something like that. I don't know. That
I don't know
great,
either.
But I think maybe it has something to do, at least for me, maybe not in Heidegger's sense, but maybe in something with humanity or what it means to be alive. Something like, which I don't know.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do some homework on it. So I guess what about framing in the other sense, right?
In the other sense, yeah, because that almost I think touches upon. I think we're talking more in the first one about how we perceive it, but then I guess the second one is how we make it, or I guess more in the artist sense rather than the audience sense.
So what do you think is significant about the idea of being framed in?
Right, or framing, or just like being like a frame maker, I guess, as opposed to...
Well, I guess what I was thinking about, like, in regards to, like, when you mentioned the example of saying, like, the conductor, or the orchestrator, or whatever, or the bandmate, or whatever, says you have to work with these foundations and nothing else.
Right.
You have to limit yourselves to these things. Why is that significant? Why might that be philosophically interesting in any way?
I think because it imposes, or it, in some sense, infringes upon one's freedom of expression. Maybe I don't really know. Maybe that's kind of bullshit. I think I'm just throwing shit at the fans. Do you feel?
Here. But here's the thing: do you really feel like limits inhibit expression? I would say.
Yeah, I know.
I would say almost the exact opposite. When you have limitless options, and you have so many conduits to express yourself, that
it's like the Kafka code, like I am free, that is why I am lost, or something like that, where he's just like, yeah, if I have all these options, I can't. Right,
it's paralyzing, right?
Let me go back.
That's why that's why Guns N' Roses
Chinese Democracy.
Why it took like 10 years to make.
Let me go back, because I don't think that was my point. I think what's interesting to me about it is that maybe it does, or maybe it doesn't go against how we conceive what an artist is, because at least I think of an artist as creating something within the frame, not so much creating a frame and then leaving that empty space blank in between. But maybe that's what an artist does anyway. Or maybe the artwork that we see creates, again, like the Heidegger thing, maybe it creates space or a frame for us then to create our opinions about the work. And maybe our opinions about the work is the artwork itself, not so much the artwork. Maybe the artwork's more of the frame.
Yeah, think about how many essays the Urinal produced. I mean, right? That are probably works of art in and of themselves, right?
Yes.
So
the nature of the artist, I guess. Yeah, like, so what does that mean then for...
Well, how clarify that? I'm a little lost. So I'm exhausted. But clarify the sense of the framing with the artist a little bit better for me.
Right. Because I think, I don't know, let's take like a piece like the Sistine Chapel.
Okay.
Like Michelangelo. Like, he painted that, right? And that is the piece of art. Like, if we're talking about like a painting has a frame and then the painting, that is the painting. And I think we perceive art as the painting more often than not, the painting, and we don't really think about
the confines.
Yeah, it's we don't really think about it as the frame, whether that be like a wooden frame or whatever. We don't really like say like, oh, we don't go to a gallery and say, oh, what a beautiful frame that is. That's so nice. We usually focus on the piece itself, but
we do. Yeah, we don't think about the things that are left out or things that are sort of excluded.
Yeah, or I'm just talking about literal frame. We don't think of that. But then when it's more about creating not so much a literal frame, but kind of like I guess kind of like a limitations or all these things, and you're not really so focused about what's in it, in the frame, then at least for me, it kind of creates these kind of like, so what does being an artist today mean? Because we're not making paintings like Rembrandt, or some of us aren't, that maybe it's more about trying to create frames for people to have artistic experiences, or to create discussion, or to create artwork in themselves, where maybe you're not really worried about making the Sistine Chapel. You're just giving people the chapel for them to kind of like, paint their own, Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo sort of thing. I don't know. I mean,
what's interesting, all this talk about frames, is that, I think about most art forms have a frame, a discernible frame. Even if it's a painting on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel or something like that, it's still working within the frame of the interior of the chapel. And if I talk about the photograph, it's like on the paper. Or if I talk about cinema, like it's like on the computer screen or the movie screen or whatever, or something like that. What's sort of interesting, I wonder how some of the themes that we've talked about so far, you could make the case that there might be one form of art that is frameless, or has its frame is not obvious to us. And the form of art that I have in mind is architecture, or like massive outdoor installation pieces or something like that.
Do you think the frame is not the city itself, or the space in which that? Well,
I don't know. I think that, like, I think about like the, when the piece of art, like, I guess it's kind of interesting how the piece of art interacts with the environment.
Yeah. And
so, like, I mean, in a way, it's totally unbounded if it's outside. So, I mean, what are we talking about with the frame? Like, if the work of art is so massive that we can't even really view it all at once, what then becomes of the frame?
Yeah.
Or maybe to put it a different way, you can't take in the Sistine Chapel all at once either. I mean, it's like super expansive, right? Like you can just like spend like all day just kind of like scanning it, and, So I guess the thing is like, if in both the outdoor sense and when you have like a massive installation piece that sort of absorbs you, and it doesn't really seem to have a frame, what do we make about the frameless or the massively overwhelming installation piece? And how is that relevant to anything we may have talked about thus far? I mean, maybe you could just say consciousness is the frame.
That, or maybe just like you said with architecture, or like a Sistine Chapel, that the chapel is the frame for the paintings. on it in general. And then maybe if you're talking about the whole Sistine Chapel itself, the town or like Rome is the frame for that.
Yeah,
or that
it's
town,
Sistine
right?
Chapel.
Where then it kind of gets more expansive for what the frame is. So I feel like and then if you keep going back, it might just be like, okay, it's humanity is the frame for this. If you just like keep going one frame after another, you might just like get to humanity, or you might just get to existence, or like you say, consciousness, or something like that. But I think what that maybe draws upon is this idea that we can kind of peel back frames, like that. Maybe a frame of like Duchamp's piece might be Paris, France during such and such a year, and then if you take a frame back, it's a certain thought for maybe existentialism, or maybe Dada, like kind of surrealist sort of thing. And then if you take a frame off of that, if you just keep going backwards, then maybe it gets more abstract, which I think is interesting, because then we just have abstract frames, and which is what I'm kind of interested in. Is
man, this is. I feel like we're like, what are those like pigs like rummaging for like. I feel like we've like scrounged all around, and we've gotten some like really good morsels here, right? Because we've got, so if I'm going to review it, right, like there's like the limitations of a frame within which someone makes like a significant piece of art, like they're attempting to make an artifact, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got everyday objects that can be sort of hemmed in to demonstrate some other kind of experience to us. Now, whether it's beauty or if it's communicate the being of the object or something like that. And then we have these experiences where our consciousness seems to be the frame, the outdoor installation pieces or the architecture or whatever else. I guess what I'm learning from this conversation is that these are all very separate, and we kind of group them all together under the umbrella of art. But I wonder if the frame, what occurs within the frame, what the frame is trying to do, and the frameless, if it really generates either a more robust theory of art or multiple theories of art, or the fact that we can have multiple theories of art in regards to all these different framing processes, if there's really no theory of art whatsoever. Mm-hmm. I wonder if the conclusion of this conversation is to be that, like, hey, dummies, and dummies being all of us that are trying to imbue some sort of significance into art, is that it's absolutely relativized. There is no science to it whatsoever. But I don't know. I mean, do you feel like that's a cop-out? Do you think that's like giving up on it? Or are we getting at intractable problems that are indicating that, like, listen, art will resist your systemization?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're getting at something that I always enjoy, where a good conversation will lead to more questions than answers. And I think maybe this is one of them, where I think art, like you said, maybe it's just a thing where we can't really define it. Or maybe at the same time, it's just that there's so many different frames from which to perceive art, to make art, to view art, I guess perceive art, that we can't really have one that's an frame, or like the major frame through which we can see things. And maybe I'm talking more like ideologically than literal frame, because I think we're kind of touching on all kinds of different frames here. But yeah, maybe it just leads to more questions than answers. But yeah,
it does open up a lot of things. Like, I feel like our conversation about this sort of slowly unfolded as we sort of meandered through the different sort of prospects of it. But, like, at least I mean, we've sort of, I hate to say this because it feels kind of punny, but we have sort of framed a lot of future philosophical conversations about art. by acknowledging all these different limitations and what the limitations do or do not do.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I mean, if there's anything sort of constructive about what we've done, is like we've kind of like we've given ourselves some intellectual content upon which we can start to philosophize. But I think when we started this, we didn't really have much clarity on the issue.
No, or at least I didn't have much clarity.
I
mean, I didn't really articulate it that well.
I certainly didn't have any clarity on it. I mean, I had no idea what we were going to talk about, you know. Yeah, so I mean, I at least have some starting point to go on. Mm-hmm. But I think I'm going to have to do. It's so inconclusive. You're much more okay with things being inconclusive. I'm like, I must know the answer.
Yeah,
so
because I mean, isn't philosophy a process? It isn't like I have the answer.
That is that is the subject probably of another episode. Yeah, I'll tell you what, man. I'll tell you what. As far as I will say this. I'll distinguish sort of my experiences between writing my dissertation and, say, putting together the lecture series and doing these exploratory conversations that we do in philosophy. Uh-huh. So I switch back and forth between the two, between lecturing on things that I have never learned before. Mm-hmm. And that process, for me personally, thinking about philosophy in new ways, having new thoughts or whatever, gives a certain vivacity to my life that justifies the study of philosophy. Mm-hmm. And I will say this, after working on a dissertation for 3 years on the same thing, like, I cannot wait for it to just be done and over. My book has, and I think it's okay to say this because I'm pretty sure like a lot of academics feel this way after they go through the torturous process of putting together a book. Is like, my book is kind of dead to me. Whereas engaging in the process of having these conversations with you, like we do every Wednesday night, and when I do my lectures and stuff like that, and like I personally am feeling alive in that process. Now maybe
I think you touch upon something really fascinating, and that maybe goes back to frames where people create a piece that is only maybe like 3 bullet points and it's a certain limitations, is that the piece is more about process than about a complete piece of work, in that sense, where it's not just like, here is the rendition of, I don't know, like John Cage's 433, or it's just like,
God, how did we not talk about that? Right,
no, but it's like, this is the approved version of John Cage's 433, where it's more just about, oh, well, let's play it in different, or let's have this piece in different environments, and here, and talk about framing. You're framing a time frame. You're framing a time frame. You're framing time, and you're framing sound in a certain way, and it'll be different in every place. But it's more about the process of like, okay, how's this piece evolve over time? But you could say that for any piece, really, where it's different each time, more or less, that there isn't really, I mean, maybe there'll be recordings of certain pieces that you like more than others, but there isn't a definitive version of it. So that could be for like John Cage's 433, or it could be for a Schubert sonata or something. It's different. So that's what's interesting for me, at least, about this frame conversation, is that we do refer to it a lot in modern art, like a John Cage or Marcel Duchamp, but like in a weird way, I think it kind of,
it's always been there,
applicable to what we consider more traditional forms of art, whether that be in painting or music. So that's where, to me, it gets interesting. It's where like, oh, well, what if you looked at traditional art in that way, in the way of a modern artist? What does that mean? Like, that to me is really cool. That's another frame in itself, which is, yeah, kind of neat. But
CJ, I wish I had all the...
Well, no, dude, it's not the answers. It's just like it's talking discussion. It's like we're not leading to a conclusive answer to anything.
I know, but I like to look smart. And I am just, I don't
is
have
philosophy, I don't know. And then again, it's like, is philosophy there to make us look smart or is it to make us look dumb? Like, I feel like maybe it's there to make us look dumb, where it's just like, we don't really know anything.
I mean, yeah. I mean, that's fundamentally what Socrates, the advantage he had on everybody else, is that he was reduced personally to total stupefaction and no knowledge, except for the knowledge that he knew nothing. So
exactly. No, but I think this conversation, like you said, there's a lot of different ways it could go, and maybe hopefully this conversation didn't really seem like, I don't know, philosophical masturbation, that hopefully people will get something out of it.
It'd be cool. Maybe maybe somebody will pick up on it, and maybe it'll be like a research topic or something like that for them. Maybe it'll be something that really animates their work.
Yeah, maybe they know something more than we do. Hopefully they do.
Yeah, if you figure this out.
Well, I don't even know if it's something to figure out, but just if you explore it.
Yeah, if you explore it, get in touch with me. All right, man. You want to call that one a day?
I think so.
All right, cool. Bye, guys.